Welcome to the Indie Film Hustle Podcast, episode number 384. Regret the past, fear the present, and dread the future. Barry Sonnenfeld.
Broadcasting from the back alley in Hollywood, it's the Indie Film Hustle Podcast, where we show you how to survive and thrive as an indie filmmaker in the jungles of the film biz. And here's your host, Alex Ferrari.
Welcome to another episode of the Indie Film Hustle Podcast. I am your quarantined and humble host, Alex Ferrari. Today's show is sponsored by Rise of the Filmtrepreneur, how to turn your independent film into a profitable business. It's harder today than ever before for independent filmmakers to make money with their films. From predatory film distributors ripping them off to huckster film aggregators who prey upon them, the odds are stacked against the indie filmmaker. The old distribution model of making money with your film is broken, and there needs to be a change. The future of independent filmmaking is the entrepreneurial filmmaker or the filmtrepreneur. In Rise of the Filmtrepreneur, I break down how to actually make money with your film projects and show you how to turn your indie film into a profitable business. With case studies examining successes and failures, this book shows you the step-by-step method to turn your passion into a profitable career. If you're making a feature film, series, or any other kind of video content, the Filmtrepreneur method will set you up for success. The book is available in paperback, ebook, and of course, audiobook. If you want to order it, just head over to www.filmbizbook.com. That's filmbizbook.com. Before we get started, guys, I set up a special link to help people affected by the coronavirus, and you can donate to Feed America. There is a lot of people in need out there, and Feed America is a great organization, and they're helping millions of people on a daily basis, and they also need your help. If you want to donate even $5, $10, it goes a long way. Head over to indiefilmhustle.com/help. Now, guys, I can't tell you how excited I am for today's episode. I had the pleasure of talking to a legendary director by the name of Barry Sonnenfeld. Now, if you don't know Barry's work, I'm going to just rattle off a couple of things that you might have seen that he has done. He is the director of The Addams Family, Men in Black 1, 2, and 3, Get Shorty, and is currently producing the series of Unfortunate Events on Netflix. Just to name a few things that he's done, by the way. He's done a lot more than that. And in this epic, almost 2-hour conversation, I sit down and take you through a journey that is Barry Sonnenfeld. He was wonderful. I love talking to him. One moment, my mouth is just gaped open at the stories he's telling. The other moments, I'm terrified. Another moment, I am laughing on the floor. It was an amazing interview. Arguably one of my favorite interviews of all time on this show. And if it wasn't enough that he is this kind of legendary director, how he got his start was even more impressive, with being the cinematographer of the Coen brothers' first 3 films. He shot Blood Simple, Raising Arizona, and Miller's Crossing. So we talk all about how he got involved with the Coen brothers, as well as his new book, Barry Sonnenfeld, Call Your Mother, Memoirs of a Neurotic Filmmaker. And also, I asked Barry about his very, very early start in the business when he shot 9 porn films in 9 days. See, everyone gets their start somewhere, guys. You know, it's not all to the Oscars right away. And that story alone is worth the price of admission to this episode. It is hilarious. Now, I am going to have to put a disclaimer on this episode. You know, we talk about some stuff that might not be appropriate for younger ears. So please, if you're listening to this on the radio, if you've got kids around, be aware this is your warning. But for everyone else, enjoy my conversation with Barry Sonnenfeld. I'd like to welcome to the show Barry Sonnenfeld. Barry, thank you so much for being on the show today.
It's a pleasure, Alex. Good to be here.
Like I was telling you before we got started, I've been a very big fan of your work for a long, long time. I was in the video store in the 80s and 90s, so you had a big impact on me with some of your early films. especially the stuff with your Coen brothers and the stuff that you were shooting as a cinematographer, which we'll get into. But I remember the big standee for Addams Family right in the front of my mom and pop store. Yeah, and
yeah, the whole family, right?
Yeah. It was a very interesting. The 80s and the 90s were a very fun time. So we'll talk about that as well. But first and foremost, what made you want to be in this ridiculous business that we call the film industry?
Oh, it was totally accidental. I didn't grow up with any sort of love or interest in films. I was not a film buff. I didn't go to a lot of movies. I thought I wanted to be a still photographer, and I bought a Leica, and I had, a series of lenses that used Leica, believe me, not a new one, too expensive. And I realized, A, I didn't think I was ever going to be good enough, and B, I thought it would be a fairly lonely profession, and I wanted to find something with just more, people in it, more communication and collaboration. But I graduated college and I took a year off, couldn't figure out what I wanted to do. And my mother had this weird fear. She was very overprotective. Hence the name of the book, Barry Sonnenfeld, Call Your Mother. And she was very overprotective and said, why don't you go to graduate film school? You should go to NYU graduate film school. You love photography. You love writing. Movies are just a lot of still photographs with writing, which, by the way, is totally not true. And, I went to NYU for 3 years, a graduate film school, and my parents had no money and they did not pay for my education. I ended up taking out massive student loans. But while at NYU, I discovered I had an ability to shoot. I was one of the two really good cameramen at graduate film school. Weirdly, the other graduate student who was a good cinematographer was my next door neighbor in the East Village, and that was Bill Pope. Pope shot, the
Matrix.
Sam Raimi. He shot the 3 Matrix movies. He shot Sam's, Spider-Man movies. He shot Men in Black 3 for me. So we were the two cameramen at NYU, as it turns out.
That's very. Those are great stories. Those are great stories. And in that early years, that was the 70s, if I'm not mistaken, right? In NYU. Yeah,
mid 70s. Yeah,
mid 70s. So Marty was already Marty at that point. He's already making stuff, or was he still hustling?
Yeah, well, he did teach at NYU undergraduate school, which was on a different campus and all that. He had already made a couple of movies. I think he had made, Mean Streets by the time we were either in or getting out of graduate film school. Yeah.
That must have been a very exciting time to be in, not only NYU specifically, but around in the film industry, because the Hollywood system was kind of breaking down. The old studio system was breaking down, and they were giving opportunities to the youngins, to the film school crazies.
You know what? We weren't in the film industry. We were barely making a living working at network couriers, delivering packages from 7 to 9 in the morning while at graduate film school. What was fun, actually, at the graduate film school is that we often had cameramen and directors come to the school and show their movie, before it was coming out, sort of, and that was interesting because, we would have who were some of the people there? There was one cinematographer who was really angry at everything, and no matter what we asked him, he'd say, it took me 18 years to get into the union and then 17 years to move up from assistant operator to DP, and I'll be damned if I'm going to tell you what it took me 30 years to learn. And he kept talking like this, and then finally I raised my hand and said, "Why are you here?"
He's a great instructor. Great instructor.
Yeah, no, great. Yeah, but we also had one night that the chairman the first year I was there was a guy named Mel Howard, who was very in the indie world, and he was going to show Bob Dylan, who was a friend of his, Bob Dylan, and several of his friends, the Robert Frank unreleased movie called Cocksucker Blues about a Rolling Stones tour.
Oh.
And the Stones had paid for it, saw it, and realized we can't release this movie. But so Robert Frank came. Also the other thing about it is it was a double system print, which meant the soundtrack and the picture track were not yet combined. And NYU Graduate Film School is one of the few places on the East Coast that had double system projections. So Mel, in order to let his buddies, Bob and Roger McGuinn and Robert Frank see the movie, he had to let the graduate students in as well. So we got to see this movie that no one's ever seen called Cocksucker Blues by Robert Frank.
And how was it?
Oh, it's lawsuitable because you're constantly seeing the Stones with groupies on their private jet having sex. So it was not something that really should have ever been shot, but it was fun. And after the movie, I saw Bob Dylan getting into a Cadillac of Roger McGuinn's, and I said, "Good car." I said to him as we passed by, "Good car to drive after a war," which is one of the lyrics for one of the songs. And he gave me the finger, which I'm very proud of.
Very nice. No, which leads me into my next question. Can you discuss the 9 pornos that you shot?
Well, it's, how great.
Well, I mean, as graphic as just try to keep it as a very hard PG-13.
Okay, all right. Very hard is ironic. Let's see. So when I got out of film school, I felt that if I owned a camera, I could call myself a cameraman without feeling like a dilettante because I owned a camera, therefore I'm a cameraman. So a buddy of mine from film school and I bought a used 16 millimeter camera called a CP16 Reflex. Now, this is way before video. So nowadays, anyone can just buy a Sony A3 or a Nikon or a Canon or A7 and call themselves a cameraman. But back then, no one was shooting video. There was no, video except, at studios and stuff. So I owned this camera with my buddy, and he knew a guy who was a porn producer and director. And so he got us this job shooting 9 feature-length movies in 9 days. They were 20-hour days.
Oh, my.
But by having 9 days of rental for the camera, it paid for 2/3 of what we paid for the camera. So it was worth it because now we, we were 2/3 of the way there. And but it was horrible. I made a contribution because at film school, everything, film was so expensive, 400 feet of raw stock to buy it, develop it, print it, so at film school, you always pre-planned everything. You did shot lists. You knew exactly what you're going to shoot. You never shot masters. You always knew where you're going to be in the close-up and only shot those lines. So what I introduced block shooting to pornos. And what block shooting means is block shooting, let's say if you're doing a streaming television show and you can only get Alec Baldwin for 2 weeks, let's say, you shoot all of his scenes in those 2 weeks, no matter who even if he's in episode 1, 4, 7, and 9, that's called block shooting. So what I convinced Dick, the producer and director, to do.
No pun intended.
No pun intended either. Very hard. 13 is that once we lit a set, be it the bathroom or the kitchen or the bedroom, we would shoot all the scenes for any movie that took place in a bedroom. So we would shoot scene 3 for movie 1, shoot scene 7 for movie 2. If it was in that bedroom, we were already lit and we would just shoot that. We also had a dentist set, which was incredibly unerotic. And, because who wants to it's, and also water picks are really not sucking devices. They're sucking devices. They're not projectile devices. So it made no sense. And also, you don't want to think about having sex in dentist, yes, or I didn't, but.
No, it doesn't seem very apt. I mean, the dentist is probably one of the more painful, non-comfortable places to be in your life as a general statement, let alone thinking about having sex in that environment.
And there's not a lot of room there or anything. So, yeah. So in any case, we shot those 9 features in 9 days, and things went horribly wrong on the last day. And without going into the details, I ended up, when a double insertion, some call it a double penetration, went horribly wrong. I ended up being covered in foamy, liquefied, warm, effervescent human excrement.
Oh, that's an amazing description.
The problem is I've always been a very wide-angle guy. When I was shooting stills with my Leica, I used a 21 millimeter.
Yeah.
I would say half of the shots in any movie I've ever shot or directed have been a 21 millimeter or wider. And 16 millimeter, the equivalent of a 21 millimeter, is called a 10 millimeter. So I was this close to the action when Mark Antony pulled out of this woman's anus, and it was as if her body was a bottle of champagne.
Oh,
that had been shaken way too long. It was literally a fountain of warm human excrement that immediately covered my face and the camera.
Oh.
I put the camera down and then threw up on them because I was so disgusted.
Why hasn't this scene made it in one of your many features, sir, or shows?
Well, I'll tell you the truth. I used to shoot commercials, and I was shooting a series of UPS commercials for an agency called Ammirati and Puris, and I told them the story. People used to hire me to hear the story because it's about a 20-minute story. It goes on and on and on. Anyway, I tell the ad agency the story. I'm done. And the next thing that happens about, 2 years later, it turns out that the next director after me to shoot commercials for these guys was Kevin Smith.
Okay.
They told Kevin the story, and Kevin stole my story.
What?
And directed a movie called, it was something like Someone and Someone Make a Porno.
Yeah. What's her name? Zach and Mary Make a Porno movie. Yeah.
Yeah. I think with Rogen, Seth Rogen.
Seth Rogen and Elizabeth Banks. Yeah.
I never saw it, but I hear that he stole my scene.
Wow.
Have you seen the movie?
Oh yeah, of course. I've seen a lot of Kevin's work.
Well, I think that there's a scene where
I don't remember that
penetration.
I promise you that I promise you there is. I don't remember it because I tend to block things like that out of my psyche. But I did. Right. I haven't seen the movie in probably a decade when it came out. But I'm sure that scene's in there. And wow, And have you ever spoken to Kevin about this?
I haven't, but his people emailed me and said Kevin is releasing the special edition DVD and wants you to talk about your porno experience. And I said, are you kidding? He stole my story, and now he wants me to also let him interview me for his DVD. So I didn't do it.
Oh, all right. Well, so I'm kind of happy I asked you the question, but I'm kind of not. So
right.
It's amazing because I've heard, I'm originally from South Florida, and in the South Florida market, when I was coming up, there was a lot of guys who I started off as an editor before I became a director. And there was people like, hey, you gotta do porn. And like, that pays the bills. I never, ever once got the opportunity. I never was even asked. I'm sure I would have done it as a younger man. I'm sure I would have edited it. But I could only imagine shooting 9 full-length feature film pornos in 9 days. not only is that exhausting, but you must become numb to all of it. Like, I'm sure like for the first 5 minutes, you're like, oh, this is kind of cool. And then that's it.
Yeah, not even 5 minutes. Maybe. No, it was never cool. It was never fun. I always say that if they released porns with smell-o-vision, no one would ever see a porn again. Although, truthfully, they would probably dub in different smells like vanilla and cherry and stuff like
and
that.
Pine. And
pine. Yeah. It was terrible. It was horrible.
Did you learn something, though? Did you learn stuff? Nothing. You learned nothing.
Oh, yeah. I learned, well, here's what I learned. I learned that nothing about filmmaking.
Okay.
What I learned is that the set on pornos is a very feminist-driven set.
Okay.
The females have all the power. The actresses have all the power because they can either help or hurt the guy, help him with his erection or just be so mean to them that they're soft and flaccid for hours. I also learned that the average time between cum shots is 4 hours. It takes 4 hours to get a cum shot. It takes about 15 minutes to do the, dialogue. Oh, hi, is your sister home?
Did someone order some pizza with extra sausage? Got it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then it takes about 20-25 minutes to shoot various sexual positions. And then Dick would say, okay, we're ready for the cum shot, at which point the other cameraman and I would dim the lights. We'd just rest our backs against some set wall and take naps. And then it would take between 3 and 4 hours for the guy to be able to come. So that's how we were able to work with so little sleep, is we had many naps during the days while the guy, and if you looked at your chart, so you could only do 5 cum shots a day because 5 times 4 is 20 hours and you needed 4 hours to just, I was the only one who went home. Everyone else, the crew was Dick, the other cameraman who I owned the camera with, a guy named Eric who was the gaffer and sound man. Right. And then we had a woman whose job it was, she was a paper towel girl. And what she did is after...
You don't have to... No. You don't have to go into details. I completely can connect the dots.
Okay, good.
I hope everybody listening can connect the dots because I don't want to go into the details of it. It is fascinating.
Yeah.
Honestly, one of my favorite origin stories of any filmmaker I've had on the show. It's amazing.
Well, that was my first job out of film school, graduate film school, shooting 9 days.
9 on film, no less, and on film, and 16. I'm assuming, right? Yeah, was it 16? Yeah, 16. Amazing. Well, so from, and the guy's name is Dick. I mean, you can't make things like that up. So from
his
there,
production company was called Mr. Mustard Production, which doesn't sound appetizing either.
Oh, Jesus. I mean, you can't write this stuff. This is amazing. All right. So how did you go from your porno experience to getting involved with the Coen brothers?
Right.
Did they see your porno work and say, hey, Barry?
I don't think anyone saw it. I don't know what. I never tracked that down. Yeah. Again, it has to do with me owning a 16 millimeter camera. I was at a party, a Christmas party with people I didn't know. I knew the hostess, but that was it. And there was one guy across the room who seemed to not be friends with everyone. A tall guy that kind of looked like Howard Stern, and that was Joe Coen. Right. And we started to talk because we were the only guys not talking to anyone else. And he had gone to NYU undergraduate school, but I didn't know him at all from there. And he and his brother Ethan had just written the screenplay for Blood Simple. And Joel was the assistant editor on Evil Dead, Sam Raimi's first movie. And Sam told Joel that the way to raise money to make an independent film was to shoot a trailer as if it was a finished movie and use that trailer to show it to, dentist investing clubs and doctor investing clubs and rich friends of your parents or whatever, because no one can read a script and say, oh yeah, I've never worked on I'm a dentist, but I'm reading the script and I think it sounds like a good movie. And also, Joel and Ethan had never done anything. So how do you know if they're any good? But by having this trailer, the dentists, the doctors, the inventors, the businessmen could look at the trailer and go, A, I'd go see this movie. B, this trailer looks really cool. C, you guys seem to know what you're doing. So Joel said, we're going to shoot a trailer of the script we wrote and see if we can raise money. And I said, well, I own a 16 millimeter camera. And he said, okay, you're hired to shoot the trailer, not the feature. So we shot the trailer, and it looked great, and we got along great. And it took us a year. Joel went out to Minneapolis where they grew up and hit all the Hadassah women. That's the sort of Jewish, women's society out there. Ethan and I stayed in New York with a print and a projector. And it took us a year, but we raised the $750,000.
Wow.
And went to Austin, Texas. And the first day shooting Blood Simple was the first day that Joel, Ethan, or I had ever been on a movie set. Wow. I had never been a camera operator or a camera assistant on features. Joel had never directed anything except student films and 8 millimeter stuff with Ethan. Ethan had never produced anything. He was a statistical typist at Macy's, where you just typed invoice numbers for 8 hours a day.
Oh my God.
So I always tell people, declare what you are, and you'll find a way to make a living doing it, and that you don't need to work your way up. You should just decide, I'm a cameraman, I'm an editor. And when people say, well, how should I get started in the film business? Truthfully, the best two things where you learn the most actually is what you did, editing and writing. Mm-hmm. Those are your best ways because you learn about structure. And also the great thing about having a script is no one can take that away from you. If you want to be a director, they can always find another director. If they want to hire another editor, they can get another editor. If you have written a script and you own it, and you say, if you want this script, I have to direct it, they'll oftentimes say yes if the script is good enough, because truthfully, studios these days want first-time directors. They want to control everything. The studio does. They don't want people that have strong opinions or people they can't push around. So I think right now it's almost easier to get a job as a first-time director than someone who's been around directing for decades.
That's why. Interesting time. Yeah, it is interesting because I think Ridley Scott came out and said, he goes, I can't believe they're giving these $200 million franchise films to a 25-year-old or a young kid, and he's very talented, or she's but it's not. It makes no sense. Why wouldn't you hire Ridley or yourself or somebody who's been down that road? And that makes absolute sense.
It's because the studios want to control everything. The studios don't really understand what directors do and think that they can do it, and that directors are like traffic cops. Mm-hmm. And, so all those Marvel movies look for first and second time directors for the most part until they're in the family. It's very interesting.
Yeah, and as of this recording, Sam Raimi just got hired to do the next Doctor Strange.
Really?
So yeah, it just got released today. The information, the news broke today. So Sam actually officially signed to do Doctor Strange, was a Master of Madness or something like that, which makes all the sense in the world because that's a perfect movie for him. Which makes sense. I wanted to ask you something in regards to Blood Simple, and I know that Sam actually, I think he was the first to do it, or at least popularize it, is putting the camera on a 2x4 and having two guys on each side just run. So you get this really insane kind of fast dolly and then shooting the film a little faster so it would get like this revved up kind of POV. You guys did that in Blood Simple as well. How did that whole thing come around?
Well, Sam kind of invented it. It was called the shaky cam. What gives it energy actually is not undercranking it, but using an extremely wide angle lens. You use a 9.8 millimeter, and this is 35 millimeters. So it's extremely wide angle. It probably has a angle of view of 165 degrees or something. It's almost everything. And because it moves through space and changes perspective so quickly because it's such a wide angle lens. I mean, like, this is a wide angle lens. So like, look, you see both my hands, and with this tiny little move, now I'm very tight. And it's because of the nature of wide angle lenses that a little move makes a very different move in perspective. So I'm trying to remember if we used it on Blood Simple. We used it a lot on Raising Arizona.
No, you did use it on, there is a shot in Blood Simple, I remember, that was like outside the house. It was coming toward the door or something. Yeah.
It's Danny Hedaya had just grabbed Fran McDormand inside the house. And we're way back on the other side of the street, and the door opens, and Hedaya is bringing her towards the lens, and we race towards him. And she breaks his finger and then kicks him in the groin. Right. And then he bends down and throws up, which is another story. So we learned that from Sam. We use it a lot more on Raising Arizona. There's a scene where we go over a fountain, over a car, up a ladder, through a window into Florence, Arizona's mouth in this fake one continuous shot. I always say that we could Blood Simple cost $750,000. I said we could redo that movie right now for $20 million, and it wouldn't be any better. We could reshoot Raising Arizona, which I think was $5 million. We could reshoot, maybe it was 12. No, I think it was 5. We could reshoot that for $50 million with techno cranes instead of using shaky cams. And again, it wouldn't look any better. So it's great how we're able to pull off all that stuff and make it seem professional.
Now, I remember in Blood Simple, which I think was one of the, I don't know if it was the first time, but the lighting there was a shot where there was bullet holes in the wall.
Right.
And shafts of light would come in with the smoke coming out. And I still remember going back, I don't know where I heard it, but I heard Joel Silver talking about that shot specifically. And he's like, I make action movies. Why doesn't my stuff look like that? And that's a testament, I'm assuming, to you, because you were the DP on that. Where was that something from your commercial world that you kind of brought into the film world? Like, because I hadn't seen that either prior to that, like something so cinematic. Because Blood Simple it's a noir film, but it is very cinematically shot.
Yeah, no, it's funny. It's one of the shots we also did for the trailer, because don't forget, we didn't have actors or anything. So for the trailer, it was very abstract. It was like dotted lines on the road. It was following, like a cowboy hat, or following like someone's boots, an insert of a gun. And in Hillary's Loft, Hillary was a woman who had the Christmas party where Joel and I met. It's now 8 months later. It's now 2-3 weeks later. We've now built the wall in Hillary's Loft, and we're shooting that shot, not the one that's in the movie, but our cheap version of it, which was we drilled these big holes, these big plugs in the wall. We literally had a wall that was probably 20 feet long by 10 feet high that we spackled and everything. We drilled these plugs out, and then we put screws in the back of the plugs, and then we replastered the wall. And then I had a lot of little inkies so I could shine all those lights in different directions, because they weren't just one light. Like every hole that opened up, there would be 3 different beams from each hole. And so I had all these inkies. I taught Ethan Coen how to be my gaffer on how to put the light bulbs in without burning himself and all that. And as I dollied into the wall, in the back, this guy, Don, was hitting the hammer to these screws, and the plug, first of all, our side of the room was pretty dark. And also the plug moved through frame so fast that it just looked like a hole opening up. And so that was in the trailer, and that's really what got us to $750,000. I heard a story that Nestor Almendros, who is a pretty famous cinematographer, and Nestor was a big believer in motivated light, which I don't believe in. Motivated light means if there's a lamp over here, that's where the main light should be from. If it's above you, it should be there. Nestor was a judge at some film festival where Blood Simple was shown. And he said, well, it's a great shot, but the light's not motivated. Because obviously in a bathroom, you wouldn't have multiple beams of light. But anyway, it worked.
It's still a cool shot. Yeah, it's still a cool shot. Yeah. Now, you brought up Raising Arizona. I have to ask you, how in God's green earth did that film get made in a studio at all? I mean, like you read that script. I have to believe you read that script and you see Blood Simple, which is completely different. I mean, it has some tones, but it is the other side of the Coen brothers. It's like they're serious, and then there's the Miller's Crossing and the Big Lebowski. They have those two juxtapositions of their sensibilities. So you've come from Blood Simple, which generally in studio world, they just want you to do the same thing again. But they've completely changed and go to Raising Arizona. How does that script get financed? And then how do you explain like how you're going to shoot? It's such a unique piece of art that was made within a studio. Even back then, I mean, now that would never ever in a million years get made. But back then even, how did that even get financed? How did that happen?
Well, Fox was a distributor, but Fox was not putting up the money. The money came from a guy named Ted Pettit, who owned a lot of movie theaters and who eventually bought the rights to Blood Simple. So the Coens, to, be the distributor. So the Coens had a relationship with Ted. Fox was very involved, but, the thing about Joe and Ethan is they would never do a film for hire. They've always had Final Cut. They're always willing to walk away if they don't have Final Cut. Joe always says, I don't know how to direct a movie if I'm not in charge of it all the way till the end. So I think it was a little risky, but it wasn't that risky. It wasn't an expensive movie. It's the other reason that Joe and Ethan can have Final Cut is their movies don't cost a lot of money. As I said, I think it might have been $5 million to do Raising Arizona. And so that the downside of that cost is not that much for a studio.
Right.
So, that's how,
And they took a risk, basically. They just kind of rolled the dice a little bit.
Yeah, but it's not that big a risk. If you lose $5 million and you can't even release it for a big studio, it's not that big a deal.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. In well, you also went on to, you not only worked with the Coens on a what you did Miller's Crossing as well, and
that's right. Yeah.
And
those three.
Those three, correct. But you also did a couple other little films as a cinematographer, that they made a couple bucks. Again, this is my golden time in the video store. So I know these movies very, very well. Big, When Harry Met Sally, and Misery, just to name a few. There was a few more in there, but those three, were massive hits of their day. And you worked with Penny Marshall. You worked with, Carl Reiner. Rob Reiner. Excuse me. Rob Reiner. And Rob Reiner again for Misery. What is the biggest takeaways you got from working on those kind of big hits? Because, I mean, Raising Arizona wasn't, if I remember correctly, it wasn't a monster hit by any stretch. It was kind of like a cult. Right. It was a cult thing. But was Big the first kind of big thing that you'd worked on that was a big box office? Or was it
the movie before Big was Throw Mama from the Train.
Yes.
So that was the first movie. Although I had been hired to shoot Big, and then after I was hired, about 2 weeks into it, the studio shut it down because they didn't. Petty wanted De Niro for the lead, and Barry Diller wanted Hanks. So we shut down to wait for Hanks, and that allowed me to go shoot Throw Mama from the Train with Danny DeVito, who became a good friend of mine. But I think that it's funny that I think Danny's movie was the first movie where I was sort of like in Hollywood, making, a real movie on real stages. And what's funny is Throw Mama was shot on stage 3/8 at Hollywood Center Studios. It was before that. It was Zoetrope, which Francis Ford Coppola owned. So the first movie I shoot in LA is Throw Mama, and it's stage 3/8. Then when I'm shooting When Harry Met Sally, part of that takes place. We shot some of it in New York, but all the sets we built, and we were on stage 3/8 at Hollywood Center Studios. Then then we shoot Misery, and Misery is shot on stage 3/8 at Hollywood Center Studios. And then I become a director, and the first thing I'm ever doing as a director is we built the mansion, the Addams Family Mansion, on stage 3/8 at Hollywood Center Studios. So I said to my wife, I call her Sweetie, I said, everyone says Hollywood is the film capital of the world. They seem to have one stage.
That's the only one they give you.
Literally 4 different times. The first 4 times I ever shot anything in Hollywood was all on the same stage.
So what are some takeaways you had from shooting those kind of big movies like Big and When Harry Met Sally, and just being in the, I've had other guests on the show that have been in the middle of like a cyclone of like big hits. And I always fascinated, and you were cinematographer at that point. So you weren't like the head, the creative force behind it at that point. But when you're the DP of Big and then When Harry Met Sally and Throw Mama from the Train and Misery back to back to back to back, there's very few guys in town who are doing this. How does it feel like to be in that time period of your career?
I really enjoyed being a cameraman. I really loved the job. I wasn't saying I should be a director. I wasn't that guy. I was really happy being a cinematographer. It was interesting to watch how different directors worked. Although, truthfully, because one of the things I believe in, both as when I was a cameraman and now as a director and a producer, is I believe that the camera can be more than a recording device. The camera can actually be a storytelling device. It can be a character in the movie. You look at Blood Simple. You look at Throw Mama from the Train. You look at Raising Arizona. You look at Addams Family, or what I did for 3 years on a series of unfortunate events for Netflix. The camera is a character in these shows. So even though I was a cinematographer, I was very involved, very, very involved in everything. I would often, after lunch, actors are usually tired. They've just eaten, or the blood's, working to digest their food, So, I always called myself not the cinematographer, but the friend of the director. So I could say to Rob or Danny or whoever, I think they had more energy in the master before lunch. You want to just remind them to pick up their energy, which is stuff that if a cameraman said to me, I'd be really annoyed by, but somehow I got away with it because I guess I was always a bit of a filmmaker. I did most of the designing of the shots to the other directors, less so with Joel and Ethan. But like on Big, I designed, all the shots and stuff like that. And with Rob, on his 2 movies, I was very instrumental in the way those movies looked and all that. I recommended that Rob hire Kathy Bates to be the lead in Misery.
Not a bad choice.
Not a bad choice. And Kathy and I became really good friends. Every morning she'd arrive on the set and go, "Fuck you, Sonnenfeld." And I go, "Fuck you, Bates." That was like our way of saying hi. Here's a horrible moment on the set of Misery. Jimmy Kahn, spent most of the movie in bed.
Yeah.
And at one point, he had, Kathy Bates goes into town, so he gets out of bed and he's in pain because his leg's all screwed up, and he has to crawl across the floor. And I'm underslung with a very wide angle lens. The camera's right on the ground, and Jimmy's crawling towards me. And Jimmy says to Rob and myself, Jimmy says, "Hey, Barry." He says, Hey, Rob, how far should I crawl? And Rob looks at me and goes, "Back." And I go, and I spit on the floor. And Rob Reiner, because I have no respect for Jimmy at this point, and Rob Reiner says, "Crawl to the loogie, Jimmy." So Rob has no respect for Jimmy either at this point. The main difference is on big features, you've got more money, you've got more equipment, you've got more cranes, you've got bigger crews, you've got more lights, and also it's easier, actually, because if you fall behind schedule, the studio has more money. On Blood Simple, there was no more money. If we needed reshoots, we shot a lot of little inserts and stuff for Blood Simple in my backyard in East Hampton, Long Island. There was no more money to be found. On big budget films, there's always more money. The studio isn't going to say, we're not finishing the movie. So
right.
I found the bigger the budget, actually, the easier it is.
Now, I heard stories about Mr. Coen on Misery, and I heard a bunch of different things. Was there when you say no respect, did you guys, did this, like Rob and him and you just have a bad situation back then? No, it wasn't. There were no fights or anything like that. It's just that Jimmy is the most frantic, energetic, sort of unable to sit still. You're talking to him and his knee is doing that, Got it. And for that actor to have to spend 80 pages in bed, he's just the wrong guy to have that job. And he just, I remember he often told me that he would spend a lot of time in the Playboy Mansion. Mm-hmm. And he said that he had had sex with 17 straight Playmates of the Month. This is decades ago. Yes, of course.
And I said, as a joke, I said, "So Jimmy, what month turned you down?" I didn't ask for her name. I just said, "What month turned you down?" And Jimmy says, "Oh, I can't tell you that." I said, "You can't tell me the month?"
Not the year. Not the year.
I don't know what year we're talking about. And this was, years earlier. It wasn't like a momentary story. It was a story about when he was hanging out at the Playboy Mansion, years ago. Oh, I can't tell you the month. So anyway, that was, but he's a lovely guy. He's just got way too much energy to be in bed for 80 pages.
It's like trying to strap down Robin Williams for 80 pages, like in a bed.
That's right.
That's right. That's just ridiculous.
Well, and in fact, and I write about this in my book, I directed Robin in RV. Yeah. And one of the issues is that Robin and I really liked each other as people, but Robin did not like me directing him because I didn't want his jazz, his improv. I wanted a really sort of controlled performance. And Robin is all about improv and joking around and this. And there were too many kids on the set that needed to know when to come in with the next line. And right. Kids know, okay, my line is after he asked me what my favorite color is, and I'm going to say green. So for Robin to improvise and say, "So how old are you?" The kid's going, "Do I say green? Do I say 8? Is that even?" So I kept trying to convince Robin this was the wrong movie and there were too many kids for that wild improvisational stuff. And I loved his improvisational stuff, but didn't want it in the movie. And I don't think Robin had a good time. He's good in the movie, but it was tough.
There was I've only met a couple people who have actually met or worked with Robin, and I had the pleasure of meeting Robin once, and I had never met a human being whose energy literally just kind of like vibrated off of him. And when I met him, he wasn't on. He was just
Right.
He was just hanging out, not cracking jokes, not looking for attention, not trying to make us smile. He was just a human being with his wife doing his thing. But I had never met a human being. You could literally feel it. Is that something that you felt as well working with him?
Oh yeah, no, it was amazing. Here's some other things. You'd have to have 6 pair of all wardrobe because he sweat so much. He was the hairiest human being I had ever met. Every day they would have to cut whatever hair was from here up because it would come out over the top. Right. And yesterday that they had shaved it yesterday. And he would sweat so much that after 4 or 5 takes with all of his energy, you'd say, the wardrobe person would say, we need to change his shirt. And so there would be all these wardrobe people with hair dryers in the distance drying shirts because we only had 6 of everything and he was going through them after every 4 takes. So it was touch and go there. The other thing about Robin is one-on-one with Robin. And again, this is in the book, but one-on-one with Robin was a pleasure. All comedians do 3 things. They collect fountain pens, they collect watches, and they collect cars. Robin was fountain pens, watches, and bicycles. He was a major biker, and he had hundreds of bicycles. But Robin was great one-on-one. I remember being at this restaurant called Chin Chin in Vancouver, which is where we shot RV, and we're sitting there. I'm learning about astronomy and the Kabbalah and about comparative religions. And then the waiter comes over. But so now instead of 2 people, there are 3, and that means showtime. And Robin became a different person. He made fun of the guy's tie. He did this. And years later, I'm back in Vancouver, 13 years later, producing a series of unfortunate events. I go to Chin Chin, and the maitre d' comes in. It's his day off. He comes in. He goes, "Sir, you don't know who I am. My name is Richard. I came in on my day off 13 years ago. I was your waiter when you had dinner with Robin. And for several years after that, I went to terrible PSTD, as did every other guest who was in the restaurant that night. I saw your name, remembered it so well. I had to come in to see how you were doing because you had to work with them every day." So that's Robin. But he's incredibly talented. You could give him a stick and say, "Give me an hour." And he'd give you an hour of comedy, pure comedy.
Good stuff. Yeah.
Holding a stick. Yeah.
Yeah, no, he was a remarkable human being, no question. Now, you say in your book that you really weren't looking to direct. You kind of fell into directing. Well, your first movie was Addams Family. How did you fall into, because if I remember correctly, Addams Family was not a small little movie. It was a studio film. It was on a established IP. And you guys were trying to basically reboot it before reboots were reboots.
Right.
For movies. So how did you fall into that? Like, most people are dying to get that job. You just fell into it.
Yeah, fell into it. I was in LA. I was staying at the Four Seasons Hotel, and I was finishing up Misery. And it was a Sunday morning, and Sweetie and I were watching the Indianapolis 500 on the television, and the front desk rang and said, "Scott Rudin just dropped by a package. We're sending it off." And in the package was a letter from Scott saying, "Read this and meet me in 2 hours at Hugo's," which is a restaurant, sort of a hippy-dippy restaurant. And if you like scrambled eggs and spaghetti, that's your restaurant. And read it and meet me in 2 hours. And it was the script for Addams Family. And I had grown up. I was not a fan of the TV show, but I liked the Munsters more, weirdly. Mm-hmm. But I loved the Charles Addams drawings that appeared in the New Yorker, and the Addams Family is based on those drawings. So I read the script. I didn't think it was very good. I said to Sweetie, "The script isn't good." And she said, "Take the meeting with Scott. Maybe he knows it's no good too." So I go and have the meeting. And I say to Scott, "Why me?" And he said, "Well, there are 2 reasons. One is I went to Terry Gilliam and Tim Burton, and they both passed. And I thought, if I can't get those 2, he said, all the good directors passed, he said. So I thought, instead of taking the chance on some comedy hack, I'd rather hire someone who has a very specific visual style and who knows comedy. And Scott, before he became an independent producer, ran Fox when we did Raising Arizona and when I shot Big. So he saw all the dailies. He heard all the stories about me and Penny, and he knew that I had designed all the shots and all that stuff. So Scott knew that I might be capable. And, I told him what was wrong with the script. He agreed. We got Paul Rudnick to do an uncredited rewrite. And next thing you know, I said to Scott at the end of the meal, I said, look, I'll tell you what, because Scott's very persuasive. I said, if you can get me the job directing the movie, I'll do it. But I didn't think he would.
Right.
So he and myself went up to Orion, which was an independent studio at the time, who was famous for being the most director-friendly studio. Mm-hmm. It was like the Netflix of its day. Mm-hmm. Right now you want to be working at Netflix because they really respect directors, et cetera, et cetera. So did Orion. So Orion thought I was a nice boy, and they trusted Scott, and they agreed to let me make Addams Family.
No, but wasn't Addams Family Paramount?
Well, that's a really good question, and of course, there's the story, which is also in my book.
Yes.
So here's what happens there. Orion, partially because they were so director-friendly, is on the verge of bankruptcy.
Yeah.
And the one piece of property, and we were halfway done shooting it, right? So the one piece of property they had, and we were halfway done, that might get them some money to stay solvent, was Addams Family, because it looked commercial. It looked like it was going to be a hit. So I also had the best editor there ever was, Dee Allen, who cut Bonnie and Clyde and, Slapshot and Reds, Serpico. So Dee cut a 15-minute reel of some scenes, and Scott Rudin took it around to all the studios. Universal almost bought it, but they didn't offer enough. And on Friday morning, Frank Mancuso Sr. of Paramount Pictures buys a movie. So it's going to become a Paramount movie. Orion will get some money just to keep them afloat for a while. Independent of him buying the movie, later that day, he gets fired. And the new guy that comes in is Stanley Jaffe, who looks at the same 15 minutes, and Stanley is humorless. He sees the same 15 minutes and says, this movie is uncuttable and unreleasable. So for the next 6 weeks or 8 weeks, I'm working at a studio that hates the project, that looks at dailies every day, and the studio people assigned to my movie are calling Dee Allen and saying, we saw the dailies. We don't think this scene will cut together. And Dee says, well, of course it will cut together. It's a really funny scene. But Fester and Wednesday are never in the same frame. And Dee says, yeah, that's what makes it funny. Okay, well, we don't. So, okay, fine. So now they hate me. They hate the movie, et cetera, et cetera. I get done. The day you get done, the director on DGA movies, studio movies, have a 10-week director's cut, right? During that time, no one can see the movie. No studio executive can come in and look at it. You don't have to show it to anyone. It's 10 weeks for you to rearrange the movie, which is now just in dailies and rough cut, into the movie you want to show the studio. The day I get finished, not the chairman of the studio, but the president, Gary Lucchese, calls me up and says, can we have lunch? Sure. I go to have lunch with him. studio commissary, in the executive commissary, like where Bill Shatner and the members of the bridge from Star Trek have lunch too. Not the Klingons, but the Star Trek guys get to have it there. And I meet Gary and this other guy named Bill, who's a creative executive assigned to us. And Gary says, show us the movie now. Don't take your 10-week DGA cut. Show it to us now. I go, Gary, it's not going to happen. It's a union thing. I have these 10 weeks. I don't have to. He goes, oh, I know you don't have to, but show it to us so we can help you. I said, I don't want your help. I don't need your help. He goes, we're your friends. I said, no, you're the enemy. No, you're not. And I said, you know what, guys? This has been fun, but I got to go. Thanks for the Cobb salad. And I get up to leave, and Gary says, hey, Barry, if you won't show us the movie, will you at least tell us what it's like? And I go, I really shouldn't do this, but I will. It's like a much sadder version of Sophie's Choice. And I leave. I go back to
That's
my
amazing.
Office. I leave. I go back to my office. I get there. The phone is ringing. Like ever. I go down the hallway. I pick up the phone. It's Scott Rudin. Did you just tell Gary Lucchese that Addams Family is a sadder version of Sophie's Choice? I go, no. He says, what did you tell him? I said, I told him it was a much sadder version of Sophie's Choice. Scott says, call him back. He believes you. Call him back. I said, Scott, how could I turn... If they had seen dailies, how could you look at those dailies and think I could turn this into a sadder version of Sophie's Choice? He goes, first of all, everyone's frightened because Stanley doesn't like the movie. Second of all, executives don't know how to look at dailies. Call Gary back. Okay. Hello, Gary Lucchese, please. Barry Sonnenfeld calling. One moment. Okay, all right. Hello, Barry. Hi, Gar. Hi. Hey, listen, Gar, remember when I told you that Addams Family was like a much sadder version of Sophie's Choice? Yes. Well, see, Gar, here's the thing. It was like kind of a joke. I didn't actually mean it. It was just like a joke. Well, then what's it really like, Barry? I said, well, really, it's really, really funny. And he said, are you serious? Oh, that's fantastic. So he's equally willing to listen to whatever I told him.
Oh, my God.
That version of Sophie's Choice, very funny movie. And then, it was tough. Stanley saw the movie, after the 10 weeks and hated it. In fact, it was in my contract when I did Addams Family Values that Stanley had to bring his wife to any recruited audience screenings of the movie so that she could tell him when it was funny. That's how
that was in your contract?
Yes, because the man had no sense of. Oh, I had other things in my contract, like that I was in charge of the set and Scott couldn't tell me what to do or whether. Because Scott drove me crazy. He was on the set on the first one every single minute, screaming at me. In pre-production, we often met in his office and things were so difficult between the two of us because Scott thinks he's right until proven wrong, which is what a producer should do or a director should do. But I also believe that I was right until proven wrong. So there were a lot of disagreements, a lot of fights. And at some point with him screaming at me, I would make a fort out of his couch. I would take all the pillows and bolsters off and I would build a fort and I would crawl into the fort and then put the last remaining pillow where the entryway was. And I would yell at him, I can't hear you. I'm in the fort. And Scott would scream, get the fuck out of there. I don't have time for this shit. This is bullshit. Get out of the fort.
God.
But he always obeyed the sanctity of the fort. He never said get out of there.
He never kicked it open. He never kicked it open.
He never went like that and said, hello, there's no fort. He'd say, and he'd yell, get out of the fort. He'd
The
never
sanctity
say,
of the
get
fort.
out of the couch, right? And I'd say, not until you apologize.
Oh my, you gotta
all
be
right,
kidding me.
then will you get it? No. And then he'd say, all right, I'm sorry. Get out of the fucking court. I go, that okay. And I, raise my head out and build the couch back into a couch. And we would continue. Because here's the thing about Hollywood.
Oh my God.
Everyone's afraid. Everyone's insecure.
Yeah.
And if you have any strong opinions and fight for those opinions, you'll usually win. It's what I learned from Scott Rudin. Rudin, his whole thing is Maggie Smith. He wants her in everything. So, I'll be in the car with him driving somewhere, and he'll be on the speakerphone with some studio, and he'll say, if I can't have Maggie Smith for that role, I'm going to quit and shut down your fucking production. And without Phil, they go, okay. You can have Maggie Smith. And I'm thinking, really, Scott? You've got all these other things, and if you can't have Maggie Smith for that one scene that she's in, you're going to shut down? Are you? And Scott says, they don't know that. They're just afraid. Scott taught me that if you stand at the edge of the cliff with the studio executive and say, let's hold hands and both commit suicide, they'll back down. They'll say, no, I don't want to die. They won't say, all right, let's do it, shithead. Come on, you want to die too? They won't do that because Scott's such a bully, just like Donald Trump. They're such bullies. At some point, everyone goes, okay. I wonder what Russia gave Trump on Lindsey Graham. I'm so interested. But I digress.
But so let me ask you, I always like to ask directors of your stature this. When you first walked on the set on the day one of the Addams Family as a director, you had been on many sets before. You've worked on many things before. What was that feeling? You're like, oh, this is all on me. Everything is riding on my shoulders. I'm the director now. I'm not, working with a director or as a cinematographer. How did that feel?
Well, two things. One, as a cinematographer, I always felt everything was on my shoulders.
Yeah,
that I had
sense.
to make the day. I mean,
yeah.
Penny Marshall would do 15 master takes and then go into coverage of extras who now are getting upgraded because she's giving them lines. And none of this will be in the movie. And I'm looking at my watch saying, oh my God, we have 20 setups today and we're about to have lunch in an hour and we're still on the master. I always felt it was always my responsibility in any position, whether I was the team or the director. However, having said that, and by the way, as a director, I was equally nervous and threw up constantly because I had a weak stomach. I was constantly throwing up on the set of Blood Simple, which was the first thing I ever did. What I did on Addams Family, which was, if I may say so myself, really smart, and I continue it to this day, is I never understand directors that hire weak people so that they can feel stronger.
Yes.
My feeling, I'm going to get all the credit anyway. Let me get people way smarter than me. So I had Dede Allen. So instead of thinking, I want a first-time editor so I don't feel insecure around someone who's done this for 40 years, I said, I want to find someone who's done this for 40 years. So I've got Dede Allen as the editor and also as the cameraman. This was you got a minute? I'll tell you the story.
Please. We've got all the time in the world, sir.
So, as a cameraman becoming a director, I looked at the other cameramen who had become directors. Gordon Willis, one of the greats, shot all the Godfather movies.
Prince of Darkness.
From Heaven, Woody Allen. Yeah, right.
Prince of Darkness,
Prince of Darkness, right? Or Bobby Greenhut says, this man lights for radio.
That's a great. Oh, I'm going to steal that line. Oh, that's a fantastic line.
That's a good line. Yeah. So Willis directs one movie called Windows. Bill Fraker, one of the great, directs one movie called The Legend of the Lone Ranger. And John Alonzo, who shot Chinatown and Farewell, My Lovely, one of the great, shoots one movie called FM. Why did none of those three cameramen, all much better than me, really great cameramen, why did they fail? Why were they only able to direct one movie? In each case, they moved their camera operator up to being the DP. What that meant is they didn't want to give up the camera. They didn't want to get someone better than them, which would force them to be the director. They really wanted to feel comfortable by being able to go back to that camera. So I said to myself, if I'm going to succeed, I need a cameraman so much better than me that I won't say, shouldn't the 10K go over there? Because then I'm not talking to the actors, right? And what my biggest fear was the actors, because I've become friends with the actors as a DP, but I've never directed actors, you know? So I hired Owen Roizman, who shot the French Connection movies, you know, all Tootsie, all these great movies, so that it would force me away from the camera and force me to actually direct actors. And what I discovered was that I loved actors, which I didn't love when I was a DP. I liked them and would hang out with them, but they never hit their marks. They would rehearse things one way and then play it another way when they came out of hair and makeup and knew their lines. So for me, the actors were the big unknown because I knew my way around a set, obviously.
Sure.
What I didn't know is, did I have any method of talking to actors? And what I discovered is, all I want actors to do is talk fast. If they talk fast, they don't have time to act. And you don't want to see acting. You want to see reality. You want to see pace. You want to see energy.
Right.
And you never want to see acting. So after every take, all I ever say to actors is, can we do one more like 10 times faster? Everyone, 10 times faster, just for fun. One more time, everyone talk much faster. And that's always the one you use. And that's what I kind of discovered. And as little as I know about film history, as someone who has exclusively directed and shot comedies, and by the way, stylizing comedies is really hard.
Yeah.
And so I think that's why Rudin hired me, because it's rare to see a comedy with visual style, you know?
Yeah, it's usually very flat or very, you know, just because comedy's playing for the gags, not playing for the lights.
That's right. But so my favorite movies were Howard Hawks comedies, like Bringing Up Baby and His Girl Friday, and all the Preston Sturges comedies.
Oh,
you know,
great.
Palm Beach Stories, Sullivan's Trouble, and everyone, no one's listening. They're just talking. No one's even waiting to understand what someone just said. They're just talking right over the next line. And that's the way I love it. And on a series of unfortunate events, when other directors were directing, sometimes I'd be up in my office working on edits of previous episodes and all that. And Melina Weissman, who played Violet on the series, would come up to me when there was another director and say, I always know when you've arrived on stage, because the director will come to all of us and say, let's just do one much faster. Meaning, oh, Barry's here. He's going to say that. So let me say it before he does. So, yes, it was really scary, but it wasn't because I was on a movie set. It was because I was going to have to talk to actors and I didn't know what that was going to be like. Now,
you shot a little movie called Men in Black. Which
I directed that.
Yes. You directed a film called Men in Black. It was just a small film with a young upstart, William something. Yes, Mr. Smith, Mr. Will Smith. When you were directing Men in Black, what was it like? Well, that was probably the biggest thing you'd ever directed at that point. I'm assuming the budget was much larger than Addams Family at that point, correct?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And then you had Will Smith who was fresh off of Independence Day, if I'm not mistaken, correct? Not yet? Nope. It was Men in Black first?
Independence Day came out first, but Will was shooting the last 2 weeks of Independence Day when we started shooting Men in Black. So the only movie he had done was called 6 Degrees of Separation.
Right.
That and, obviously Fresh Prince, and that's how I knew.
Oh, so he wasn't a star. He wasn't a monster star while you were shooting. He was still Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, who got the lead in a huge studio movie, basically.
That's right.
Yeah, and I guess they saw him on Independence Day or something, and they said, "Hey."
They didn't. They had nothing to do with it.
Yeah, did you cast him?
Yeah.
Oh wow.
So here's what happened.
Okay.
So I get the script, and Sweetie and I read our scripts together. This is before email, so we got sent 2 copies. Sweetie always gives me a 60-page head start because I'm a slow reader. And we finished the scripts, and I turned to her and I said, Tommy Lee Jones. And she turned to me and said, Will Smith. And I said, who's Will Smith? And she said, oh, have you not seen Fresh Prince? And I go, I guess not. She says, you want Will Smith. And you always do what your wife tells you. So the studio and Spielberg and the producers don't want Tommy or Will. They want Clint Eastwood and Chris O'Donnell.
Oh, that's right. I heard about that. Yes, that was the original casting, Chris O'Donnell.
Right. Yeah. So Spielberg says, Chris is in L.A. I want you to come to L.A. and convince Chris to do the movie. He's staying at the Four Seasons Hotel. We'll put you up. So I go out to L.A., stay at the Four Seasons, same place I was when Scott Rudin sent me the script for Addams Family. And Chris says, look, I read the script. I think the script has potential, but right now it's not very good. And I also have this other project that I'm being offered that has Stallone in it. So tell me why I should do Men in Black. And I said, first of all, you should definitely do the movie with Stallone. He's really smart. He knows everything about camera. In fact, Stallone fired me off of Tango and Cash.
I heard about that.
Cameraman. So he's really smart. So you should do that. And second of all, in terms of the script of Men in Black, it's not very good. And I don't know how to make it better. And truthfully, I'm not much of a director. So Chris passed. I'm shocked.
Shockingly.
shocked, I say. So Chris passed. By the way, Chris is a really, really good actor.
Yeah.
It's just that my wife told me that I wanted Will Smith. So that's the end of that story. So I lived year-round in East Hampton for 30 years. And Spielberg spent the summers there. And so we were both in the Hamptons. And I knew Will Smith was in Philly at a wedding. And I arranged for a helicopter to come up and fly Will to meet Spielberg. Wow. So Spielberg met Will in East Hampton. Will was very funny and charming. And they agreed to let me hire Will. In fact, Independence Day didn't come out until about 2 weeks before we wrapped principal photography on Men in Black. So I had 18 weeks before Will was a movie star. He was just a television star. So that was easy for me. The last 2 weeks when that movie opened, Will became a movie star.
Did he become a movie star in those last 2 weeks?
He's always been great. He's always been relaxed and funny and, irreverent. Yeah.
Yeah. That must have been amazing. And how was it working with I know you did some visual effect work in Addams Family, but Men in Black was a whole other world.
Yes and no. The truth is I was very lucky to have hired Rick Baker to do the creature design. And Rick taught me, and it's something I believe in to this day. Rick taught me that anything you can do with puppets, or you should. Mm-hmm. And so like all the worm guy scenes in Men in Black, our rod puppets, we built, we always placed the worm guys so that we could have rods coming through a wall behind them, because then you can ad lib. Then your actors are working with other actors, because all puppeteers are funny and charming and are members of SAG, and they have senses of humor. So you can, there's a line in the first Men in Black which wasn't written. I threw it into the set, which is, I said to Tommy, ask the worm guy pouring you coffee if it's the same old shit today. And the worm guy goes, no, Viennese cinnamon. was my favorite kind of coffee when I lived on the Upper West Side was Viennese cinnamon, cinnamon infused in the bean. So you couldn't do that with visual effects because most visual effects supervisors and designers and animators, their strength is not comedy,
No, right.
And also, I got to tell you, I really, really, really don't like the look of most modern visual effects movies. I cannot look at those Marvel movies. They disobey they look like video games.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, they disobey all rules of physics. You can't have Hulk in the foreground on the San Francisco Golden State, the San Francisco Bridge, super close up, and all of San Francisco in the background also be in focus. As soon as you do that, as soon as you don't play depth of field, the audience knows it's not real. The audience knows they're watching a video game, and it just takes you out of the movie. So, like, even the whole ending when D'Onofrio's spacecraft that he's stolen from the World's Fair crashes into the ground and comes racing up to Will and Tommy, and it breaks through the Unisphere. Those were all miniatures. They were giant miniatures. They were all 20, 25, 30 feet big. But it was all shot real. Because if that was whenever you go to visual effects, you can put the camera anywhere. You can cheat. You can play with depth of field, and the audience knows it. So, truthfully, I always thought that Men in Black was a buddy movie with a few visual effects. If you look at it again, it's very rudimentary. I mean, it's real and it looks great, but there's not a lot of VFX in it. Really.
I guess you're right. It is a lot of miniature work there. I mean, it started getting a little bit more like by 2 and 3, there was a little bit more visual effects in it. But the first one, I think, you're right. It was very more pure in the sense of in camera, as much as you could.
That's right. Whatever you can do in camera, whatever you can do with puppets, even if they're, radio controlled puppets or whatever. The whole Men in Black 3, the whole Cape Canaveral thing and all that, that's all visual effects. I mean, we built a big set, but, it's way enhanced and all that. But the first one was not a big visual effects movie. But I've always been comfortable around visual effects. It's all, why? Because visual effects require pre-production. And we talked about this earlier at NYU when film stock was so expensive.
Yeah.
I always design shots way early because the worst place to ever make a decision is on a movie set. The worst place is not knowing where you want the camera, and you look out the window of the set and the crew is all lying on like sound blankets and stunt pads or playing Frisbee, and a day is a couple of $100,000 a day to shoot, and you're wasting time while crews are sleeping.
Yeah.
That's devastating. So visual effects requires the same thing that low budget requires, which is everything is pre-planned and there are no surprises.
Men in Black reminds me of like 48 Hours with aliens, basically, in a sense like that, because it is the buddy cop movie and they're complete opposites and stuff. I'm just cranking my brain back, and I can't think of a movie like Men in Black or like the buddy action sci-fi. I think it was the first one to do that. Am I wrong?
I don't know, because I'm not a film buff, but you might be right. What's the other one? Midnight Express. No, not Midnight Express. What's the Brolin, Josh?
No, that's Midnight. No, that's Midnight Run. But I'm talking about sci-fi.
Midnight Run.
Yes. Yeah, yeah.
But what I'm saying is Midnight Run is like 48 Hours in that it's a buddy movie. This comedy disguises this big mob thing. And in fact, I always felt that Marty, whenever there were those big chase scenes and police cars, I didn't want that. I wanted more buddy stuff. So I think Men in Black may have been the first buddy science fiction movie, but I don't know. I don't want to take credit for it, but I will say it's a buddy movie. And
no question.
Will and Tommy's chemistry was fantastic.
Yeah, that's the thing that people, when directors and filmmakers don't understand, chemistry can save you in so much. Like when you have good chemistry with actors, it can save bad production value. It could save other things, like, because people are so drawn in by that chemistry. And you could, Will just oozes chemistry, like his energy, but mixed with Tommy Lee, who is completely opposite, but it's kind of like the yin and yang just works so beautifully together.
It's George Burns and Gracie Allen, with Will Smith as Gracie Allen and Tommy Lee Jones as George Burns. And in fact, Tommy on the first movie hated me because he thought he was in a comedy and kept trying to be funny. And I kept
no,
explaining to Tommy that you're going to be funny by doing nothing. You are the audience's point of view. You are the reaction shot. The reaction shot always gets more laughs. You're the straight man. And he didn't understand comedy at all. Will loved him. I loved him. Tommy loved Will. I loved Will. We all loved each other, but Tommy really had a problem with me. Luckily, he loved Will, so it was okay. And the other problem with Tommy is he's like a little kid. He was always playing with the neuralizer and breaking them. And whenever they had to shoot their guns, because they were space guns, and they didn't make any sound, and we didn't have squibs, he would make a sound. So he'd go, cut, Tommy, don't make the sound of the gun. I didn't. Will, Tommy, yeah, you did it again, sir. You made the sound. No, I didn't. Tommy, Will's telling. All right, and we do 8 takes where Tommy would, one after another, because he couldn't go like that and not hear a sound, so he would do it. So he was making the gun sound.
It's funny.
But it was great.
It's funny that my short film had the same problems in it that Men in Black did, because I had guns and my actors would go pew pew. I'm like, dude, stop that. We can't. You're ruining the audio.
Right. And we're seeing you make sounds.
That was the thing.
Mouth.
Pew pew. It would, like, you got to stop to the pew pew or the choo choo.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's amazing. Now, you also directed another film, which I absolutely love. It's one of my favorite comedies of all time, is Get Shorty. Love Get Shorty. And the way you got Get Shorty was through Throw Mama from the Train all those years back. Can you kind of explain that whole little connection?
The studios didn't want to make Elmore Leonard movies. No movie that had been turned into a movie from an Elmore Leonard novel had ever made money. And no studio wanted to make movies that were inside Hollywood. The reason I bring that up is because I bought the paperback of Get Shorty and no one had the rights to it. Normally,
everyone
Elmore would think, before this, in galleys, they would have read it and bought it. Elmore was like not someone that the studio wanted to work with because none of his movies had done well. Not that he had written, but that he had written a novel, not the screenplay. But in any case, I'm on this cruise with my wife. I read Get Shorty. And for me, Get Shorty is about a guy who's so self-confident, the Travolta role, that he will go from a numbers runner to a big-time producer just because everyone in Hollywood is afraid. So if someone comes in with any self-confidence, they will rule.
Right.
So I was thinking, who's the most self-confident person I've ever worked with? For no apparent reason, and that's Danny DeVito. So I read the book. I say, sweetie, read this book. Who's the lead? Sweetie reads the book. She says, Danny. I go, exactly. Because Danny is so I called Danny. I go, I just read a book that you should read. He goes, okay, I'll buy it. I'll produce it. You'll direct it. I'll start it. I go, great. He gets the rights to it. He calls me up about 6 weeks later, says, we got the rights. I said, do you love it? He goes, I don't know. I haven't read it. I just bought it because you wanted it. Right? So that's pretty great.
Wow.
So, it takes years. Every studio passes for those two reasons. Elmore Leonard, it's a script about
movie making, right?
Hollywood. Yeah. Scott Frank has written a brilliant script. For years, no one wants to make it. In fact, near the end of the 5 years it took to even get a studio to agree to make it, I get sent Men in Black. I get hired to do Men in Black. I quit Men in Black because I'm not getting along with the producers. I direct Get Shorty, and then Men in Black is still available. I see the head of the president of production at the Ivy at the Shore with Uma Thurman. I go up to him and I go, by the way, I finished Get Shorty. I'm in post-production. If you want to rehire me to do Men in Black, I'm now available.
So you shot half of Men in Black and then you got left?
No. I quit before we ever
shot anything.
Got a script that I liked. So I quit, and also because we finally got MGM to agree to make Get Shorty. And I'll tell you another story about confidence and how we got Get Shorty made. The budget for Get Shorty was $30,250,000. MGM said, "We'll make the movie for $30 million. You have to lose $250,000." So Danny DeVito and the line producer and I went to MGM, and I said, "All right, how do you want to lose the $250?" And they said, "Well, we've been looking at the budget, and truthfully, the budget's very tight. But we do have a few suggestions. You've got $2,500 down for parking. Isn't that a lot? Can we lose it?" Graham said, "Nope, can't lose it. It's a union rule. You got to pay for parking if you're on a set instead of stage. But couldn't we do it for $1,500?" And I go, "Oh, Jesus, we're going to save $1,000 here." And Graham says, "No, it's $2,500. And then someone else says, "Oh, well, wait. In this scene, look at these first four lines. Can we lose the first four lines?" Yeah. And I go, that won't help because I still need exactly the same setup. It's a prepaid scene. So, and then I said, "Look, I'm going to tell you how to lose $250,000. And if we lose the $250,000, do we have a green light? Can I leave this room with a green light and we can do this movie if we can lose the $250,000? And now Danny and Graham are shocked because they know the budget and they know we can't lose $250,000. And Mike Marcus, the head of MGM, says, "Yes, if you can lose the $250,000, it's a greenlit movie." And I said, "Okay, there's a scene where Travolta visits Gene Hackman's character on the set of one of his 10-day wonders." Gene Hackman is basically playing Roger Corman, Hackman does these 10-day movies. I said it's a great scene, and it'll be bloody hatchets, and we've got Ben Stiller, who's willing to play the NYU recently graduated director. Right. And I said, that scene takes place over 2 nights. Each night costs $125,000. It's a great scene, but it doesn't move the story forward. If we lose that scene, no one will ever say, "How did he know?" It's just a great scene, but it's not a plot scene. It's a comedy scene. And my philosophy is if you can take a scene out of a movie without it hurting the movie, get rid of it. It's why Get Shorty is the only movie that's over 90 minutes that I've ever directed. And that's because the script is 20 pages longer than a normal movie. So I said, we lose that scene. It's 2 nights, $125,000 a night. We save $250,000. We're on budget and we can get a green light. Mike says, "Find another way. I love that scene." I said, "You don't need it, Mike, and you can't afford it. The scene is out." He goes, "It's not out. I love that scene." I said, "The budget's $30 million with that scene out. We're on budget. We're on schedule now. You can't have it." He said, "Don't tell me I can't have it. I'm the head of the studio." I said, "You can't have it." He says, "What will it take to have it?" I said, $250,000. He said, "You got it." So I said, "Okay, just to be clear, what of this movie is now $30,250,000 with that scene in there?" He says, "I just told you that, asshole." I said, "Okay, just checking." So, but the reason I had power was because I was willing to lose the scene. If I wasn't willing to lose the scene, if I was faking it, they would have known it. But I meant it, and I meant it. And by the way, the scene is not in the movie. We shot it, and it's a hilarious scene, and Ben Stiller is great, and there's a joke because Travolta, who's never been on a movie set, who loves movies, keeps sitting on different director chairs, and people keep saying, "Get out of my fucking chair." So that's a sort of a comedy runner. Ben Stiller was hilarious, but it didn't move the story forward. And I could tell the audience was going to get antsy because it came after two other scenes that were really good scenes, but also didn't move the plot forward. It came after the scene at the movie theater where Travolta is watching Touch of Evil. Mm-hmm. Great scene. You could cut that out of the movie. It's just a scene that shows how much Travolta loves movies. And he's mouthing lines, you know, he's mouthing the line, the fat guy did, you know, whatever. So I have my first recruited audience screening, and I have final cut on that movie. And Mike Marcus comes to the first recruited audience screening, and the scene isn't in there, right? Because I knew it wasn't going to work. I didn't even want to try putting it in, even though it was a great scene, because once you lose an audience in a comedy, it takes 10, 15 minutes to ever get them back again. And you hear them scratching their butts and coughing. So I didn't want to ruin the first recruited audience screening. So Marcus is sitting right next to me, Mike Marcus, and he says, "Hey, fucker, where's the scene?" I said, "Mike, it's not going to work." He said, "Look, you have final cut. Will you do me a favor? At our next recruited screening, will you just put it in there so I can see it and convince you otherwise?" I said, "Mike, I'm going to lose it. Shithead, you have final cut. I've seen it this way. Just do it." Everyone calls me shithead and little fucker. It's fine. The next recruited audience screening we have, I put the scene in there. Halfway through the scene, you're starting to hear the audience cough and rustle. And Mike leans over to me and says, "You fucking piece of shit, you were right. Take it out."
But what's fascinating is that you pulled the Jedi mind trick on him in that meeting. Is like for that extra 250,000. It was fascinating how you turned it on its head. It's Hollywood 101. It really is a masterclass in how to work that room. If you ever able to get into that room.
That's right. But the secret is you have to mean it, and you have to be, don't bluff it. See, Scott Rudin does the same thing, but he's full of shit when he says, "Come on, let's jump off the cliff." Or if I can't have Maggie Smith, I'm going to, shut down the movie. I don't believe, listen, did you ever see Jake Kasdan's movie, The TV Set?
No, I haven't. I know of it, but I never saw it.
Jake Kasdan directed this fantastic comedy about pilot season called The TV Set with David Duchovny. And part of the issue, part of what David Duchovny is a writer-director, and what they do is they know they want this actor. They want actor A, but you never bring one actor into the studio room to audition. You always need someone who the studio can say, "No, don't like him," right? But you usually bring in an actor who's good enough that if they say, we want actor B, you're not stuck. But in Jake's movie, they bring in actor A who they all want, except the studio. And then the worst actor ever. And the studio, of course, says, "Well, we love that terrible actor." So the company's character is stuck directing the worst actor ever. So you don't want to pull a fast one and be called on it. Like, you don't want Mike Marcus to say, "All right, if 30 million means not having that scene, fine. I'm great not having it." So that's why don't pick a scene you really want. Pick a scene that you really believe. And I'm always a big believer. I always say I'd rather do 90 scenes perfectly where I have the right budget and the right cranes and the right actors, and I didn't need a day player, and I was able to cast this guy, than 91 scenes where every scene is compromised because there's just too many scenes, so I couldn't have the techno crane, and I had to go with a day player. So I'm always willing to pare down the budget, to lose stuff I don't need, so the stuff I have left, I can do really well.
Very, very smart.
A piece of advice.
Now, can you tell me what your favorite part of the whole filmmaking process is?
My two favorite parts are pre-production and post-production. The worst part is directing and being on the set, because as Truffaut's favorite part is post, and it's kind of my favorite part too. But, you know, Truffaut says the worst your movie is ever going to be is the last day you're shooting. And then you get to make it good again.
That's true.
You know?
Yeah.
You wanted a sunset, but it was overcast that day. There's no sunset, but you have to shoot anyway. It's only disappointment. You never leave the set at the end of the day saying, that was surprisingly much better than I thought. You leave the set every day going, I don't know if we have the scene or not, but we're moving on. The set's being torn down tomorrow. So, and then in post-production, you lose stuff, you get rid of stuff, you have ADR, you have music, you have visual effects. You suddenly discover, I remember there was a scene in Addams Family, and Dee Dee and I were about 5 months into cutting, and I said to Dee Dee, should we just lose a scene? And Dee Dee went, yeah. And I said, how long have you known that? She said, well, a couple of months. And I said, well, why didn't you tell me? She said, like a good psychiatrist, she said, you had to discover to lose the scene. And I said, well, did we lose it? She said, yeah. Or sometimes when the third act isn't working, don't touch the third act, touch the second act. Oh, people are so bored in the second act that they've given up on the third act. Just shorten the second act and change nothing in the third act. And people say, why did you change it to the third act? Not a thing. Mm-hmm. It was all in the second act. So post-production, what you learn is that film is a very fluid plastic medium where you can change things. Also, audiences are so stupid about continuity and geography. Yeah. Change things. And, in Blood Simple, we use 5 different cars for Ray. There's a Fiat, there's an Oldsmobile, a Volvo, a Buick, and another Buick. One Buick was yellow and one was green. And no one notices that that Ray is driving 5 different cars. And they think it's just one car. So my favorite part is post. My second favorite part is prep, where you have all the time in the world to design the shots and figure stuff out. And suddenly you're with the writer saying, hey, listen, can you add a thing here? Because I need more space to get from A to B for the actor, because I want to be tracking with them the whole time without a cutaway. Or you say the production designer, can you move that window so it's exactly opposite the door, so Raul can open the door and I can pull back through the whole set out the other window and see Pubert jumping off, whatever. So post and prep, anything that's not stress related, I like. And shooting is the most stress related there is.
And what I find funny is that no matter how big the movie or how small the movie, the problems are similar. And they're just the same. Like everything you just said, I have gone through on my indie movies, my indie productions, my indie commercial, or doing commercial work or music video work or TV work. It's all the same. $300 million or $30,000. It's
absolutely. Blood Simple had the same problems that Men in Black 3 had, except Men in Black 3, actually, we could just throw more money at it, and Blood Simple, we couldn't. So, but it's the same problem, losing sets, that kind of stuff. Wrong actor.
Oh, yes. Now, can you tell us about your new book, Barry Sonnenfeld, Call Your Mother?
Yes. Well, the second half of the book is pretty much what we've been talking about. It's about meeting the Coens and Blood Simple, and there's a lot about Addams Family, and there's a lot about there's very little about Men in Black or any of that stuff, because there's always hope for a sequel. But so the second half is about my career in the movie business, Scott Rudin, all that stuff. The first is how I got to where I am today, which is by having totally insane, narcissistic parents. The title of the book, Barry Sonnenfeld, Call Your Mother, is because at 2:20 in the morning, in January 1970, while Jimi Hendrix was warming up Madison Square Garden, 19,600 people over the PA system, Barry Sonnenfeld Call Your Mother. So, hence the title of the book. My mother was very protective, overprotective. I said I'd be home at 2. It was 2:20. So therefore, in that 20 minutes, she assumed I had died.
Obviously.
And this is, way before payphone. This is before, pagers or cell phones or anything. So you had to go to the payphone and call your mother, weeping because you assume your father has died, because how else would someone be able to convince anyone who picked up the phone to go through enough levels to get this weeping woman to speak to the person who has to decide, yes, we will make this announcement. I mean, it's truly amazing. And I'll tell you a funny story. I was there that night with my girlfriend. We were seniors at the High School of Music and Art.
Oh, God.
And due to the coronavirus, she had been looking through some file boxes and found the ticket stub of the fact that she and I went to the Mets at Shea Stadium the day the Mets won the World Series, and had sent me the stub. And she said, I couldn't find your address, so I did some research, and I see you have a new book out called Barry Sonnenfeld, Call Your Mother. I remember that evening so well. You must really remember it. So I have proof that I'm not making up the story, that my girlfriend from 50 years ago found me, sent me the ticket stub for the Mets game, and remembered that it referred to the Madison Square Garden incident. So the first half is about my young life, how I became sort of a person filled with neurosis, and based on all these sort of adventures I had growing up. And they sort of interweave, like in the middle of a story about my fear of flying, based on my mother's convincing pilots to drop the oxygen mask because she thought she was having a heart attack while flying on our first commercial flight to Miami. I'll interweave that with having a meeting with MC Hammer at the end of Addams Family. He wrote this great song, the Addams
Family
song.
Of course.
Yeah. They do what they want to do.
Say what they want to say. Live how they want to live. Play how they want to play. Of course. I remember this.
Exactly. But that fear of flying story becomes meeting MC Hammer. The fact that I knew I was going to sell one of my 1962 Lincoln Continentals to a black person. And when I was meeting Hammer, I parked my Lincoln right in front of where we were having our meeting at Paramount so that he could see the car. And I said to Hammer, how many cars do you own? This is after, we convinced him to write the song. He says, well, I have 12. And I said, I think it's going to be 13. And he says, wait, that's not your Lincoln, is it? So I sold MC Hammer my Lincoln. So these stories are interwoven within the body of the book for the most part.
You are fairly well adjusted for a man raised with a mother that neurotic. I too had a Cuban mom. I'm a Cuban mom from Miami. So, absolutely. If it's 202, you're dead. You're dead. You're dead in the streets. If it's 220, the devil has taken your soul. So, there's no confirmation of the dead body. So now we have to up it. Dead is not enough. The soul is gone.
That's right. Yes. Those Cuban mothers can give the Jewish mothers a run for their money.
Oh,
for sure.
Man. I feel you, my friend. I feel you. Now, I'm going to ask you a few questions I ask all of my guests. What advice would you give a filmmaker trying to break into the business today?
Okay. If you're a writer, write a script, because what we talked about is that a script is something you own that no one can take away from you. You can either sell it or insist that you're the director or that you have a producing credit or whatever. Write a script. If you want to learn how to make films, I would say try to get a job in the cutting room, because editing is where you learn structure and storytelling. The great thing about nowadays is because there are video cameras that are very available and cheap, and because there are so many outlets, the other thing I would do is if I wanted to be a film director or a cameraman or something, or a filmmaker, I'd find a couple of friends that are very good actors, and I would write some stuff for them and shoot these 8 or 10 minute things and start to develop storylines or characters for these little shows. So, I did recently did a Q&A with Barry Sonnenfeld at the 92nd Street Y in New York. Mm-hmm. And someone said to Jerry, how do you become a writer? And I loved his answer so much. He said, how do you write? Jerry said, you get a pen and you get a pad and you turn off your phone and you turn off your computers and you sit there. And he said, you're writing. Even if you haven't written anything, just don't touch your phone. And at the end of the day, maybe you've written 4 lines, maybe you haven't written anything, but your process of sitting there with that pen and that pad, you are writing. And I think it's so brilliant and so true. And in the same way, if you declare yourself a director and you start directing, you are a director. So get out there, make those small little films, find a couple of great actors, write some funny or interesting, or, there was this guy, when GoPros first came out, did this amazing parkour thing, and he got himself a feature from it. And I don't think the feature did well, but it was just so visually arresting. It was about an 8-minute video, where the camera went everywhere. So what I would say is start doing stuff. Don't talk about it. Go out and start shooting.
What is the lesson that took you the longest to learn, whether in the film industry or in life?
Okay, I'm going to talk about the film industry. The lesson took me the longest time to learn, and I finally learned it, is, although this book might queer that deal because I might anger some people, but in any case, I would always, when I had disagreements about the studio, on the Men in Black movies or whatever, and we were going to do some reshoots, whatever, and the head of the studio or whatever had ideas, I'd go, I couldn't disagree more. Or I totally disagree with that. That's what we need. Will Smith kept saying to me, he called me Baz. He keeps saying, Baz, that doesn't help. Don't take that approach, because now they're on the defensive. And on Men in Black 3, I wanted to do some additional photography. And the head of the studio had one series of ideas, and I had a totally different set of ideas. She presented her set of ideas, and instead of saying, I totally disagree, I said, I so see why you think those scenes are great, and I so appreciate why those scenes are exactly what you think we need. And without any more saying why I think those are great ideas, here's what I have come up with. And I would say totally different stuff, but I would get it. And I was allowed to do what I wanted to do because I didn't immediately anger everyone by saying, I disagree, or that's a stupid idea, or that's not what we need. Instead, I'd say, totally understand all those reasons. I think they're all great ideas. I have some different ideas, and I'll tell you what I think my ideas will do for us. But I no longer say, bad idea, I disagree. I start out totally agreeing with them so that they are no longer adversaries, but we're on the same team. And that took me decades to learn.
You're very Jedi Master-esque when you speak like this. This is hilarious.
I know, with the 250 grand, I came to Jedi very late in life. You do not want to go. You don't want that. That's not the person you want. Yeah.
These are not the droids you're looking for, sir.
Yeah, that's the line.
Now, what was the biggest fear you had to overcome when you made, or you were first walked onto a set, whether that be Blood Simple or like that convinced you to, I can do this? Like, what was that fear you had to overcome?
Well, as a cinematographer, I needed to start to see dailies and to see that the way I thought, because this, again, is way before video taps even. So it's not like now you're on the set and you look at a monitor and what you see is what you get, because everyone uses video cameras. So I had to discover that I was good and that I did know what I was doing as a cameraman. I mean, literally, I had shot a bunch of porn and some industrials for Rabbi Gelman pictures,
Right.
that make boxes.
Right.
So on the set of Blood Simple, I had never done this before.
Right.
Literally had never shot a feature. So I had to start to see stuff to see, I'm okay at this. I can do this. And then when I became a director, again, I had to spend enough time with the actors. And believe me, I was totally stressed out. I fainted on the Addams Family set one morning. I then convinced myself just over time, the other thing is the more you do it, the more comfortable you get doing it.
Right.
Is why I was saying to your audience when they're starting out, just keep doing it. Do another one, do another 8-minute video, do another 4-minute video, do this. Because the more stuff you shoot, the more you realize, I see. If I'm over the shoulder here with a 50 millimeter, and then I come around to the other over the shoulder, and I'm on a 21 millimeter, it doesn't match, and they don't look like they're in the same room even. I should use the same lens on both over the shoulder. Stuff like that you don't know until you do.
Right.
And that was the great thing about film school, although now you can do it on your own, which is it allowed you to make movies. And until you actually make them, you can't watch a lot of movies and figure out all those things. You got to do it.
Right. Yeah. You could look at someone writing music, but until you actually start getting it there, I listen to a symphony. It's easy. I could do this.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, the toughest question of all, 3 of your favorite films of all time.
Oh, that's easy. Dr. Strangelove.
Of course.
That's my number 1. I really like Taxi Driver. I haven't seen it in a long time. I'm going to say Taxi Driver. And I'm going to say Palm Beach Story, which is a comedy directed by Preston Sturges.
Yes. Now, since you said Dr. Strangelove is your favorite, I have to then do a follow-up question, which is your favorite Kubrick film? I'm assuming you're a Kubrick fan.
Dr. Strangelove. Dr. Strangelove is my favorite movie ever. Mm-hmm. My favorite Kubrick movie. Number 2, I would say, is 2001. Mm-hmm. I didn't like Eyes Wide Shut. I don't think I saw Clockwork Orange because it seemed too scary. I've never seen a scary movie. I've never seen like
Shining.
No, or Exorcist or anything like that. The problem was when I was a kid, I went to see Jason and the Argonauts, and there's that scene with the skeleton, and it was the last scary movie I ever saw. I think it was like 10, and I've never seen a Twilight Zone or an Outer Limits or anything. Stranger Things.
Never seen it. So you're more into so in your wheelhouse, the comedies and the actions and the yes. And can you tell the audience where they can find the book and when it's out?
The book came out on March 10th.
Okay.
It's hard to get right now because the bookstores are closed. So what I would say is either buy the Kindle version and read it on your iPad. There's about 100 photos in it, so the iPad is a really good way to read it. Or the audio book is read by me, Barry Sonnenfeld. So you get 10 hours of this voice. But it's I'm very sarcastic while reading it. Don Katz, who's the CEO of Audible.com, told me that rarely has he listened to a book where the reader knew where to put the quotation marks within their voice. And I have great pacing and I pause at just the right place. So he thought I did a very good job reading it, which was surprising to me because I didn't want to read it. I wanted Max Greenfield to read it. Max has become a friend of mine, but they wanted, Hachette the publisher wanted me to read it. So I did. So you can order it as a hardcover from either, Amazon or Barnes & Noble. It just takes a while because they're backlogged because of shipping other things for coronavirus and stuff like that. But I would say if you want immediate gratification, either the audio book, the audible.com book, or the download the Kindle version.
And
so that's what I
And it makes the most sense that you would be a good audiobook reader because you tell stories. You've been telling stories your entire life. So you have that knack already to just the pacing, the story. Just listening to you tell your stories so brilliantly. The pacing, the timing, it's there. I'm sure at a party you are the center of attention.
Well, I'm an only child and I'm Jewish, so I'm supposed to be.
Exactly. And before we leave, can you tell the audience your philosophy of life?
Yes. 9 words.
Go ahead.
Regret the past, fear the present, dread the future.
Very optimistic.
Well, okay, I'm going to leave you with this.
Yeah, go ahead.
There's no upside in being an optimist. There is only an upside in being a pessimist. And I'll tell you why. If you get on a plane and you turn to the guy sitting next to you and you say, this plane is going to crash before we get to Cleveland, either one of two things happen. If the plane starts to nosedive, you get to turn to the guy sitting next to you and go, was I right or what? Or if the plane doesn't crash, you win because you landed successfully in Cleveland. It's a win-win as long as you're a pessimist.
Because if you would have been positive in that situation, you're like, hey, I think we're going to be clear sailing. And if it starts going nail down, you're just like, well, no win.
Well, I guess I was wrong. No win. No elbowing the guy next to you going, hello.
Oh,
so,
my God.
Yeah. So always be a pessimist. That's my secret.
And on that note, sir, I truly thank you for all the time you've dedicated to the show today. It has been an absolute pleasure. I know we could probably speak for another 4 or 5 hours, but thank you so much for your wisdom and your humor and your entertainment today, because it's been an absolute joy talking to you. So thank you, Barry.
You too. It's been a total pleasure, and I stay safe, and we'll see each other when I eventually get to LA.
I want to thank Barry so much for dropping not only knowledge bombs on the tribe today, but easily one of the most entertaining episodes I have ever had the pleasure of doing here on the Indie Film Hustle podcast. Thank you so, so much, Barry. If you want to check out Barry's book and get even more of these amazing stories, you can head over to www.indiefilmhustle.com/384 for the show notes. And it's also available in audiobook with his lovely voice narrating the amazing stories that he has. So if you're sitting around quarantine and want to just sit down and enjoy some great Hollywood stories, this is the book for you. I want to thank you guys for listening. I am working on something fairly big, again, because I'm in quarantine now. So I am now more focused than I usually am, which is kind of scary. But I am working on something pretty big for the tribe, something I haven't done before, something pretty epic. And I hope to release it or let you guys know about it in the coming weeks. So keep an eye out for that. Thank you guys again so much for listening. As always, keep that hustle going, keep that dream alive, stay home, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Indie Film Hustle podcast at indiefilmhustle.com. That's INDIEFILMHUSTLE.com.